Hi guys, Mimi G here and welcome back. I'm really excited about today's sew along because it's for a very special pattern. Vogue has re-released the very classic wrap dress by DVF, and today I am going to walk you through how to put it together. So let's get started. Now this is not a learn to sew video, so if you are a total beginner and need some help, Simplicity.com has a list of resource videos that cover all the very basics of sewing. Okay, let's go ahead and start with our bodice pieces. So I have gone ahead and made the darts in the back shoulder and also my bust dart. So go ahead and do that. We're gonna prep our bodices to attach the skirt. Both shoulders have a dart, and obviously you have two bust darts. And then the other thing you wanna make sure and do is to stay stitch your neckline. So I've stay stitched both my fronts and also around the back neckline. I also wanna point out that this is a vintage pattern, and so there are things in it that I probably am not gonna do. For instance, in the instructions, they have you interface the actual front bodice, the back neck, and the front of the skirt, and I opted to interface my facings instead of doing it on the actual garment. So it's up to you, whichever one you want to do, but I like having my facings with some stability. Okay, so I have my back piece. I have, like I mentioned, my two darts sewn already, but you also have two very tiny pleats here. So you're gonna go ahead and bring your solid line to your broken line. You're pleating towards the center back, and I'm gonna go ahead and pin. Okay, so I have them pinned in place. Now head to your sewing machine. You're just gonna stitch across to make sure that these stay in place. All right, now that we have our pleats in the back, let's go ahead and work on the back skirt. We're gonna go ahead and stitch together our center back seam. So I'm gonna go ahead and pin, right sides are facing. Okay, we're gonna start at the hem and we're gonna work our way up using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, make sure to back stitch. Go ahead and finish your seam. Okay, I have gone ahead and serged my raw edge and pressed it to one side. Now with the right side facing up towards me, we're gonna go ahead and grab our back bodice, and with right sides facing, we're gonna go ahead and pin along the waistline. Okay, now let's head over to the sewing machine and we're gonna stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, now that we've attached the back bodice to the skirt, we're gonna go ahead and set this aside and grab one of your front bodices and one of your skirt fronts. Okay, so I have one skirt right side facing me, and I have one of my bodices right side is gonna be facing my skirt, and you have notches here, so let's go ahead and pin there. Okay, you're gonna pin your other front and your other skirt the same exact way. Now we're gonna head to the sewing machine, and just like we did for the back, we're gonna go ahead and stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Go ahead and sew your other skirt front the same way. Okay, so we have our bodice, back and front attached to the skirt portion. So what we're gonna do now is we're going to go ahead and pin along the shoulders and also our entire side seam. Now we are leaving an opening on the right side of the dress between those two markings that you should have transferred onto your fabric. That's where our tie wraps around our body. I did want to also mention that because there's going to be an opening there, I want to be able to press my seams flat and open. And so because of that, I've gone ahead and serged my entire side seam on both sides of my back and also on the sides of my front. Okay, we're going to go ahead and grab one of our fronts, and with right sides facing, we're going to go ahead and pin the shoulders. And now let's go ahead and pin our side seam. Match up notches. And you want to make sure that you are matching up your waist seam line. Now this is my left, so I am not leaving an opening, so I'm going to go ahead and pin at the waist. Okay, so for the left side, we're going to start at the hem and we're going to work one continuous stitch all the way up using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're gonna go ahead and do our shoulder. Then we'll come back and pin the right side. Okay, now while you're here, let's go ahead and do our shoulder. Go ahead and finish your raw edge. All right, I've gone ahead and laid my right over my back, right sides are facing, and I'm gonna go ahead and pin the shoulder, same as we did before. And you're gonna pin your entire side seam. The only difference is that we're leaving an opening here. So I have my pins there set so that I can make sure and remember not to close it. So I'm gonna match up my seam lines, and then I'm gonna pin on either side where my markings are. And then you can go ahead and continue to pin the rest of your side seam. Okay, we're gonna start again from the hem. We're gonna work up until we get to that pin or dot marking that you have. You're gonna backstitch and break your thread, and then we're gonna move up to the next marking, backstitch again, and then continue sewing. Okay, so here's my first marking. I'm gonna go ahead and backstitch, break my thread. Now we're gonna go ahead and backstitch and continue. Now go ahead and sew your shoulders the same way we did before. Okay, so as you can see, I have my seams pressed open. You can see my opening here for my tie. Now on the right side, if you'd like, you can go ahead and stitch a 1/4 inch away from your opening just to sort of secure this in place. Now the next thing that we're gonna do is we're gonna grab our ties. So I'm gonna set this aside. All right, so we have 2 ties. Now on this end, we have like sort of this little funny shape. So as you can see, I have a row of stitching here. That's just to secure this because we're gonna be cutting into our fabric. We're gonna cut to the stitching line, but not through the stitching. So you should have marked your little dots. I'm gonna go ahead and snip. Now we're gonna go ahead and fold right sides facing. And we're gonna pin. Now this side where we made our snips stays open. Okay, we're gonna start at the top. We're gonna stitch along the long end, and then we're going to pivot and stitch and close the bottom end. Okay, go ahead and pin and sew your other tie the same way. All right, I have gone ahead and trimmed my seam allowance. Now we're gonna turn this right side out. Okay, you wanna make sure and poke out that little tip. Okay, now go ahead to your ironing table and you're gonna give your ties a good press. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and pin our tie to both fronts. So you see here I have one front, and you'll notice on your tie that you have a notch, and you also have a notch on the front bodice. So we're gonna go ahead and with right sides facing, we're gonna pin at that notch. Now the reason that we snip into our fabric is because then we're going to go ahead, angle this down. The end of your tie should be at that other notch, and we're gonna go ahead and pin there. And I'm gonna pin just along the middle. Okay, now you're gonna head to your sewing machine. We're gonna stitch our tie in place. You're gonna pin and stitch your other tie to the other front the same exact way. All right, you're gonna go ahead and grab both your collar pieces. One should be interfaced, one isn't. You're gonna go ahead, place them right sides facing. And we're gonna pin. And we're also gonna pin the short ends. Okay, let's head to the sewing machine. We're gonna stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, and we're gonna stitch the sides and the top of our collar. Okay, go ahead and trim your corners and turn your collar right side out. Okay, we're gonna go ahead and pin our collar to our neckline so you have some notches here. We're gonna go ahead and pin. First, I'm gonna pin at the shoulder, matching up that marking, and then I'm gonna match up these two notches, the one that's on my collar and the one that's on the bodice. And then do the same thing on the other side. Okay, and now I'm gonna put one pin in the middle. All right, let's head to the sewing machine. We're gonna stitch our collar down using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now that we have our collar attached, we're gonna go ahead, set the dress aside, and we're gonna go ahead and sew our facings. Okay, so I have my front facings first. So we're gonna go ahead and grab our back facing, and we have notches, so we're gonna go ahead and align that notch and pin. Okay, go ahead to your sewing machine and stitch these together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Then I want you to press your seam open. All right, now we're gonna go ahead and grab the bottom facing and attach it. So I just wanna point out one little thing. So when I went to go ahead and pin it in place, I noticed that the notch on the front facing and the notch on the front facing for the skirt don't quite actually line up. So the dots do line up, but the notch seems to be in the wrong place. So I just want to point that out in case you're like trying to pin this and it's not matching up, that's why. So instead, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go based on my dot and pin there. So I've got one end, I have my dot marked on both, right sides are gonna be facing. I'm gonna make sure that my dot is aligned, and I'm gonna pin. And then you'll wanna pin your other facing to this side the same exact way. Let's go ahead and stitch this together using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Stitch your other one the same way, then press your seams open. All right, so I have gone ahead and finished off the outer edge of my facing. Now we're gonna go ahead and pin it to our dress. So with right sides facing, we're gonna go ahead and pin, making sure that we're matching our notches, also our shoulder seams. And let's go ahead and work our way down one side. I wanna make sure I'm matching this up with my waist seam. And now we can work our way down our skirt front. Okay, we're gonna pin the other side the same exact way. Then we're gonna head to the sewing machine, and I'm actually going to start at the center back and work my way down one direction, and then come back to the center back and work my way back in the other direction. We're using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. All right, I'm starting at the center back. Okay, start back in the center back and then go in the other direction. All right, I've gone ahead and pressed my facing to the inside. Now the instructions have you top stitch along the front bodice. I don't want top stitching on my wrap, so I'm skipping that, but if you do want to do the top stitching, now would be the time to do it. We're gonna set this aside and we're gonna grab our sleeves. Okay, I have both my sleeves folded right sides facing. We're gonna go ahead and pin. Now we're going to go to the sewing machine. We're going to stitch using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, starting at the bottom, working our way up. You're going to do both your sleeves. Okay, once you're done with your sleeves, you can turn them right side out and you can go ahead and press your underarm seam. We're going to go ahead and sew together our cuffs. So with right sides facing, you should have one interfaced, one that is not. We're going to go ahead and pin. Okay, once you have it pinned, you're going to pin both your cuffs the same way. We're going to go ahead and stitch our short end along the top and then down the other side using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, you're going to go ahead and trim your corners and turn right side out. All right, so I have my cuff already turned right side out and I gave it a good press. I'm looking at my underarm seam and your cuff should have a little dot. We're going to place the dot at the underarm seam, right sides facing. And we're going to pin there first. You also have a notch. You're not overlapping your cuff. Okay, once we have our cuff pinned, we're going to go ahead and stitch all the way around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, I want you to go ahead and grab your cuff facing and with, let me set these aside one sec. With right sides facing, you're going to go ahead and fold this onto itself and you're going to stitch close the short end using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. You're going to do that for both of the facings. Okay, so I went ahead and finished one edge of my facing. Now we're going to go ahead and slip this over. We're going to match up the seam to the underarm seam. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pin. Okay, once you have them both pinned, you're going to do the same thing to your other sleeve. You're going to stitch your facing onto the sleeve hem using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, so I have stitched the facing in place all the way around using the 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And then what you're going to do is the facing goes to the inside, okay? And what I want you to do is I want you to press it in place. So you're pressing your seam allowances up towards this sleeve. After you do that, it'll look basically like this on the outside. And on the inside, it'll be pressed so that the sleeve facing is up. So what that does is it finishes off this little edge here. It gives you a really nice finish. Plus our cuff is going to be up, right? So when we have our cuff sort of pinned up like this, you'll have a nice finish. Now the instructions have you hand stitch the very top of your facing in place. But I actually think you could get this under the sewing machine and just stitch it down in place because you're not going to see it anyway, right? Because your cuff is going to be hiding it. So if you want to hand stitch it, great. If you don't and you want to machine stitch it, you totally can. Because again, you're not going to see it once your cuff is up. And then for your cuff, we're going to grab a little button and you just stitch through both layers. So there's no buttonhole or anything. You're just going to stitch the button through the entire cuff. So I'm going to go ahead and set this aside. I'm going to grab my dress so that we can pin our sleeves. Okay, we're going to go ahead and pin our sleeve to our dress. So first I'm going to pin matching my underarm seam to my side seam. Right sides are facing. Okay, and then I like to work from inside. So I'm going to go ahead and match up my single notch to my single notch. And then I'm going to go ahead and match my shoulder notch to my shoulder seam and my double notches. Okay, now because we're working with a knit, we can go ahead and ease our sleeve cap in. Now, depending on the amount of stretch that your knit has, you may be able to do this without having to ease the sleeve cap. If your knit does not have a significant amount of stretch and you need to make little slits into your bodice armhole, not the sleeve cap itself, you can do that. If you find that you have too much ease, then you can always unpin, ease your sleeve cap with some gathering stitches, 2 rows, and then continue. Once you have your sleeve pinned, we can go ahead and stitch all the way around using 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. Okay, go ahead and finish your raw edge. Then you're gonna go ahead and pin and sew your other sleeve the same way. Okay guys, now the last thing that you have left is your hem, but I wanted to mention that the hem allowance on the dress is 3 inches. I suggest you try it on at whatever length you cut, whether you cut the shorter version or the longer version. Try it on and make sure that you like the length. You might not want to take up 3 inches on the hem. You might want to take less. I just tried my dress on and I definitely don't want to take 3 inches off the hem. So what you're going to do is you're going to open out your facing and you're going to fold it onto the dress like this. And I'm going to go ahead and pin just so it doesn't move on me. Now, if you are doing 3 inches, then you're going to stitch across your facing at 3 inches, okay? Because that's going to be your hem. If you're doing less, if you're doing 1 inch, then you're going to measure from the bottom up 1 inch, and then you're going to stitch your facing in place. So whatever hem allowance you've chosen or decided on, that's where you're going to be doing your stitching line. So I'm going to go ahead and do mine at the 1 inch mark. And then we're gonna turn this out and then you can press your hem. Okay, so now I'm gonna trim off some of the facing. So I'm cutting just the facing. And then I'm gonna go ahead and cut into that corner. And then you can turn this right side out. Poke out that corner. And as you can see, I gave myself a stitching line. I always give myself a stitching line so it's even all the way from one side to the other, and I use that guide to turn under and press my hem in place. Now you have 2 options here. You can go ahead and stitch this with your machine, or as the instructions tell you, you can hand stitch your hem in place, or you could do a blind stitch on your machine if you're able to do that. So I'm gonna go ahead and press my hem allowance all the way from one side to the other. All right guys, once you're done with your hem, all you have left to do is to pick a cute button and then stitch it through both layers of your cuffs and you are all done. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed this sew along, and please make sure and tag us on Instagram at Simplicity Creative Group and also at Mimi G Style so we can see all of your amazing makes. Until next time, peace.